Alrighty, and good Wednesday evening, everybody. Hope you've enjoyed your Wednesday on this July 10th, and we're going to get right to it. We're looking at the tropics again, and we'll look at the satellite imagery just like we started off yesterday. And big things to know is that the lower level circulation and the mid-level circulation of this tropical disturbance are both now finally over water. Over the course of the day, notice how we can kind of see a very broad circulation here over the eastern Gulf of Mexico. Most of this has been in the mid to upper levels. The surface circulation has been kind of struggling most of the day. I'll show that in just a second. But the overall scope of the system is still fairly large. You can see as all the moisture in place, you see all these thunderstorms fire up along the sea breezes across Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and into the Florida Peninsula as well. So there's still a pretty good scope of this system that's impacting a fairly large area. There's also some major flood problems across parts of southeast Louisiana, including New Orleans this morning, with just some rainfall that's being caused by this system. So we'll talk about impacts as well with this as we go over the next few minutes here. Like I said earlier, the low-level circulation has been kind of struggling today. And if we look at tropical tidbits, again, my friend Levi Cowan providing all this really good data publicly. So huge thanks shout out to him. If you want to check out some really cool stuff, be sure to check out his website, tropicaltidbits.com. So we're looking at the reconnaissance aircraft data from earlier today when they were investigating the system. And this is all lower level observations towards the surface. And these white colors, these light blue colors, are generally light winds, basically indicative of a not so organized low-level circulation. Overall, the circulation has been pretty broad, generally elongated in this kind of form. And as we went over the course of the afternoon, it's kind of rotating closer to the mid-level circulation in a form like this. So now the circulation's a little bit more like this as the last reconnaissance flight began to leave the system. So the big takeaway from this, though, is that this system is not rapidly organizing at the moment. It still has a little ways to go. So it's something worth watching as we go into the overnight hours and into tomorrow, how quickly it begins to organize. Because as of this afternoon, it still has a little ways to go before it can really begin to intensify. Again, the surface circulation needs to become more compact, not broad, and it needs to be stacked underneath that mid-level circulation we looked at earlier. The Hurricane Center earlier today issued an advisory on potential tropical cyclone 2. Basically, this allows the National Hurricane Center to issue watches and warnings for hurricane watches, tropical storm watches, and also for storm surge as well with these systems, regardless of whether they've actually formed or not. So tomorrow, we're still expecting this system to eventually become a tropical storm. In that case, it would be called Barry. But in the meantime, we're going with potential tropical cyclone 2 to kind of help give the threat levels out to the public and help you get prepared for any potential tropical cyclone. Most models that do form this by tomorrow bring this up to a strong tropical storm or even hurricane strength. So the Hurricane Center is agreeing with that thought process and does bring it to a low-end Category 1 by the time it makes landfall somewhere along the Louisiana coast late in the day on Saturday as it moves off towards the north. So just something to keep in mind there. However, regardless of where the exact center goes, we like to say it all the time, do not focus on where these little icons are or where the center will come on shore. There are many impacts to consider. As with all tropical cyclones or even tropical waves, rainfall and flooding are the biggest issues. Again, water does the most damage. So we're looking at the official forecast from NOAA, and with this potential track, if it were to go into that particular part of the Louisiana coastline, we're looking at widespread rainfall amounts in the red to be near 10 inches or even a foot. And some of these purple regions are over a foot of rain in some isolated areas. So that's a lot of rainfall. And some models are even getting close to 20 inches in some isolated spots with the system, depending upon how fast it does decide to move inland. So again, a lot of impacts to consider with this potential tropical cyclone. And again, with the large size of it, we're already seeing it today, a lot of the thunderstorm activity ongoing that can produce localized flooding. as this system organizes as well, we'll start to get an onshore wind that will begin to impact some of the coastline from Mobile to Biloxi into New Orleans, the southeast Louisiana coastline. So as you get that onshore flow, that helps produce some coastal flooding. You have the rip current risk across a large area along the coastline and the local beach areas. So you get the rip current risk, coastal flooding. So there's a lot of factors to consider with these tropical systems than just the winds. Never just focus on the winds. There's always multiple impacts when it comes to these systems. Where is it going to go? Well, let's take a look at some model data. Again, we're back on Tropical Tidbits, and we'll look at the American model. Notice this afternoon's model run doing fairly well with the broad circulation located just south of the Florida Panhandle. So they're not doing a terrible job in depicting what is actually going on right now. By tomorrow, it seems to agree with the National Hurricane Center that this should become eventually a closed circulation sometime tomorrow afternoon. And in that case, it would be called Tropical Storm Barry. And if we look at the European model, which sometimes, most of the time, tends to be a little bit more accurate when it comes to these systems, also produces a tropical storm sometime late tomorrow morning and going into tomorrow afternoon. So some good agreement now, finally, between some models in terms of organization and timing for this potential tropical system. Where they differ, however, is going to be with speed and location of landfall. And the reason for this is going to be the strength of the system, where the low-level circulation forms tonight, the strength of the high pressure here over the four corners, and also the strength of the high pressure here that's nosing its way into the western Atlantic. So let's go into potential scenarios. I think most models are finally agreeing that there will be some sort of weakness here over the eastern and central United States with a high pressure that is slowly weakening over the four corners and also a ridge of high pressure over the western Atlantic. I think that we're all agreeing on that. So there's going to be a weakness here. It's not a strong one. So that means that even if this were a weak system, if it was weak, it probably wouldn't feel this weakness as much. So it was going to take a strong tropical storm or a weak hurricane to really pull this north a little bit quicker. So if we look back at the satellite imagery, let's say that the surface circulation were to form a little bit closer to the mid-level circulation and a little bit further south. This would allow it to be a little bit further away from that weakness in the high pressure, and therefore it can kind of meander down to the southwest even, and even to the west, and make a landfall further off to the west. It would also allow it to be over warmer water for a longer period of time. So that would be one solution. The other one would be, let's say the circulation stays generally elongated and a little bit closer to the coastline. This would take a little bit longer to organize. It would keep it a little bit weaker, but it's closer to that weakness. So the minute it starts to organize and vertically stack, it's going to start taking that track to the north. Again, that would be the right side of this cone. General, that it would be curving off a little bit quicker. That western solution I talked about is the western edge of the National Hurricane Center cone. So all those scenarios are being depicted here by the National Hurricane Center. Again, another reason why we say don't focus on this center line. Anywhere in this cone is fair game for the center, and also still stays point that you never want to focus on just the winds or where the center is going to be. There are widespread impacts far from the center. So I think most models are agreeing that this storm will eventually curve off to the north. The question is going to be when. Will it be closer towards the southeast Louisiana coastline, or will it be somewhere here near the southeast Texas coastline? Still some questions to consider. We don't really exactly know where this is going to go, and that's just because of the overall elongation of this system and the fact that it, again, is not a true tropical storm just yet. Once we get an exact circulation defined at the surface, that will help the computer models begin to get a better grasp on where the system is forming, how it's moving, and then we can finally get a good idea of where this may make landfall. Either way, if it does form not until tomorrow, that means there's about less than 48 hours before it comes in contact with any land areas. So that just means that anyone along the coastline from Mississippi down through New Orleans, through southeast Louisiana coast, through the western Louisiana coast, and even parts of southeast Texas should keep in mind their preparations for a potential tropical storm or hurricane, and also should closely watch how this system evolves over the next 24 hours. Anywhere along those areas should be monitoring this system very closely and already thinking about what plans to put in place. So to reiterate, one of the biggest concerns we're going to have with this system is going to be the rainfall. Again, also with this track, let's say it does come a little bit further to the east. This would put some of the heavier rainfall amounts more in Mississippi, even parts of western Alabama. If this were further west over here, these areas would still get a lot of heavy rainfall across the central Louisiana coast, but some of the heaviest amounts may be a little bit closer to Lake Charles and also parts of Texas. So I guess the heaviest rain amounts may shift depending upon how fast the system moves and where the core of it may come on shore, but there's still going to be a widespread area of rainfall amounts easily over 6 inches, which will cause a lot of problems with inland flooding. So just something to keep in mind there. So as we close this out, the system is still broad and somewhat disorganized, but is expected to form into a tropical storm sometime tomorrow. In that case, it would be called Tropical Storm Barry. We will continue to have reconnaissance aircraft investigating this system through the night and going into tomorrow. That way we can get some good location fixes and also upper air observations to help the models depict of how strong that ridge of high pressure is to the west and also to its east. Any areas along the central Gulf Coast should be preparing for a potential tropical storm or low-end hurricane. Also, with inland flooding, it spreads well inland, so be prepared for that. A lot of potential flooding, heavy rainfall amounts, rip current risk across a large area of the Gulf Coast, some coastal flooding with a constant onshore wind. You'll have isolated tornadoes in some of these rain bands that start to come through tomorrow and all the way through the weekend. So again, a lot of impacts to start thinking of as we go over the next few days. That is it for now. I will continue to monitor this system. In the meantime, as we said yesterday, keep it tuned to your local reliable weather sources, including the National Hurricane Center and your local National Weather Service office.